My name is Major Ethan Brooks, and at 39 years old, I have spent more than a decade living in the quiet corners of the U.S. Army's Cyber Command. I never expected my career to stay so rooted in the shadows, but that is where I found my purpose. While other soldiers trained on firing ranges or briefed high-ranking officers in bright rooms, I spent most of my days in server vaults and dimly lit operations centers, keeping the digital backbone of our missions alive. It was not glamorous, but it was the kind of work that demanded patience, discipline, and a steady mind, and those were the strengths I carried with me long before I ever put on the uniform. When I first joined Cyber Command, I was one of the youngest analysts in the unit. My job then was simple, or at least it looked simple from the outside. I sorted through logs, patched vulnerabilities, and responded to small incidents that never reached the news. I learned quickly that the most dangerous threats were the ones that moved quietly, slipping between lines of code like ghosts. That understanding shaped everything I built in the years that followed, because I never forgot how vulnerable a system could be when people underestimated what they could not see. Over time, I became the one they called for the problems no one else wanted. I liked that they trusted me with the messy work. I liked that I could fix things without asking for credit. I spent long nights tracing hostile traffic, redesigning protocols, and sketching out ideas on whiteboards when the halls were empty. I was not trying to invent anything extraordinary. I only wanted to make sure the soldiers depending on our systems never found themselves blind in a moment that demanded clarity. That sense of responsibility stayed with me every single day. The system I eventually built, SentinelNet, grew from a few handwritten notes taped to my monitor. It was meant to be a protective layer, a unified grid that brought our scattered networks together under one intelligent structure. Piece by piece, I wrote the architecture, designed the logic, and tested every rule until it behaved like a living organism. SentinelNet monitored threats, rerouted traffic, hardened data pathways, and adapted to new dangers faster than a human could track. It was not perfect, but it was resilient, and resilience mattered more than perfection when lives depended on milliseconds. Some people said I treated SentinelNet like it was my own child. Maybe I did. I spent more nights with those servers than I ever did with friends or family. I knew every behavior pattern, every anomaly that hinted something was wrong, and every hidden corner that even skilled operators missed. When a breach attempt hit the perimeter, I felt it before the alert even flashed on screen. I was connected to the system in a way I never fully explained, and maybe I never needed to. The work spoke for itself, even if no one else saw the hours behind it. As the years went by, my title changed and my responsibilities grew, but my attitude stayed the same. I never wanted applause. I never wanted a spotlight. I wanted a system that held steady when the world started shaking, and I wanted to be the one who kept it steady. That was enough for me. Knowing that I had built something dependable, something soldiers on the other side of the world trusted without ever knowing my name, gave my work a meaning I never needed to justify to anyone. Looking back, I realized those 12 years shaped me more than any promotion or commendation ever could. I learned what it meant to serve quietly, to let the mission matter more than ego, and to build something strong enough to outlast the people who misunderstood it. I was not just maintaining a system, I was protecting the thin line that kept chaos from seeping into the places we could not afford to lose. And that was a purpose I carried with a quiet pride no one could take from me. Colonel Jackson arrived with the kind of energy that turned heads for all the wrong reasons. He was younger than me by nearly a decade, dressed sharp, talked fast, and moved like a man who thought he was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. He came from Army comms, where the biggest threat was a misaligned press statement or a delayed media asset, not a state-backed cyber attack waiting to paralyze a command center. From the moment he walked into the operations wing, I could feel the shift. He had no patience for quiet rooms or long explanations. He wanted dashboards, visuals, metrics that moved, and results that looked good in morning briefings. During our first meeting, he glanced at the SentinelNet schema for less than a minute before pushing it aside like a manual for a microwave he'd never read. He called my work redundant, too heavy, too complicated for what he called modern operational speed. I sat there listening as he outlined plans to restructure how we handled real-time data, streamlining it so the public affairs teams could access reporting tools faster. Not intelligence teams, not tactical units, public affairs. The part that stuck with me the most was a 5-minute exchange that left a hole in my gut. He said the firewall layer I'd spent 4 months building was throttling mail servers, claimed his team ran tests and decided it was unnecessary. Without looking at me, he gave the order to strip it out of the stack. Said it was slowing down internal email response time. Just like that, years of planning undone by someone who barely understood what the system was protecting against. I tried to speak up once, calmly. I explained that firewall wasn't just a filter. It was adaptive. It caught anomalies at the behavioral level, the kind of threat signature detection couldn't catch until it was too late. He brushed it off like I was trying to save a pet project. Said his people would optimize something cleaner, faster, more user-friendly. That word stung more than I expected. After that, the exclusion became standard. Briefings were held without me. Policy changes came through without review. Protocol updates bypassed my team entirely. I wasn't being phased out with hostility. I was being ignored, overwritten by someone who didn't even pause long enough to learn how things actually worked. It's a strange kind of anger when you watch someone dismantle what you built without even realizing what it does. It doesn't flare up or boil over. It settles in your chest like cold metal, heavy and sharp. I stopped trying to explain myself after a while. Not because I gave up, but because I understood what kind of leader he was. He didn't want insight. He wanted obedience with a polished finish. By the end of the first month, I wasn't just sidelined. I was invisible. Yet every time I walked past those silent servers, I knew the truth. They were still running because of what I built, not because of him, not because of the decisions being made in polished rooms with glass walls. That truth held me together, even when everything else started to crack. The meeting was short. I was called into a secured briefing room just before 0900, and the look on the adjutant's face told me everything before a single word was spoken. Colonel Jackson didn't bother standing when I entered. He kept his posture casual, like this was just another meeting on a long checklist he needed to get through before lunch. He said the Army was moving in a new direction. Said my role as lead systems architect had become redundant. There was a review, a restructure, and just like that, my service was no longer required. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because I had prepared for this. I had run the scenario in my head 100 times, and now that it was happening, it felt almost rehearsed. I didn't ask questions. I didn't push back. I thanked him for the opportunity and turned to leave. But what he didn't realize was that firing me didn't just take a name off the roster. It activated a contingency built into the very structure of SentinelNet, the system they were so eager to control without understanding. When I designed SentinelNet, I didn't just build a wall. I built a living structure tied to a singular digital root certificate, and that certificate had one binding rule written into its core permissions. Only I could hold it, and the moment my military credentials were revoked or reassigned without formal reassignment of that key, the system would interpret the change as a breach. Protocol called it the disaster lockout mode. It was a final failsafe, buried in the architecture to prevent foreign takeovers or internal compromises. It wasn't secret. It was documented, but like most things technical, it had never been read closely by the brass. They signed off on its approval during Phase 3 of deployment because I packaged it in the risk mitigation summary. It sounded like insurance. It was. As I stepped out into the cool hallway and past the flag I had walked under for 12 years, I felt no rage, no bitterness, just clarity. They had made their move. Now mine was already in motion. I went home, opened my secure terminal, and launched the compliance interface built into SentinelNet's backend. Everything was ticking. The system had already detected the deactivation of my multi-level access. My root certificate was still logged in the vault, but the admin chain had been severed. By default, that meant the system was counting down to lockout. 80 hours. That's all it had. After that, critical command modules would enter stasis. New directives would be blocked. Live intel routing would be suspended. And most importantly, the outer perimeter shielding our classified network architecture would harden. Not break, not fail, just isolate, no outside updates, no override commands. A fortress sealed from the inside. I drafted my email to the Legal and Compliance Division with care. No emotion, just protocol. Subject line, Digital Certificate Termination, Triggered Lockout Clause. Body, per Protocol 9A subsection 4. Removal of authorized certificate holder without formal transfer has activated disaster lockout mode within SentinelNet. Unless a compliant override is issued through certified reinitialization with my approval, system will self-contain per design in 78 hours. This is a compliance notice, not a threat. I signed it, Major Ethan Brooks, RET, and encrypted the message before sending. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need to. The system had already begun sealing itself. Silent, steady, just as I had built it to be. By nightfall, I knew they had seen it. The email had been flagged 3 times by internal routing filters and escalated. A system-wide bulletin had gone out. Low-priority commands were already being delayed. By morning, the first signs would be clear to anyone paying attention. Reports not syncing. Logs not updating. Data movement sluggish like wading through molasses. Jackson wouldn't understand the root cause. Not right away. He'd probably blame infrastructure, demand a reset, or tell some underpaid analyst to clear the cache. But it wouldn't matter. Without the root, nothing would change. The clock was ticking, and for once, I held every second of it in the palm of my hand. The weekend passed like a slow drift through open water. No alarms, no messages. Just the hum of silence that comes before something heavy lands. I spent most of it alone, not because I was hiding, but because there was nothing left to explain. Saturday was methodical. I reviewed logs, verified system status, and triple-checked the cascade timers hard-coded into SentinelNet. Everything was aligned, clean, and irreversible. The failsafe wouldn't trip loudly. It would happen in stages, quietly, like frost spreading across glass. Sunday, I went offline. Left the house. Took a walk through the woods near my cabin where signal barely reached. I wasn't avoiding the fallout. I just didn't need to watch it in real time. I had already done the work. What came next wasn't mine to manage. Monday morning arrived the way all Mondays do. Still, unassuming. But by 0630, the first status ping hit my backup inbox. Query denied. Data tunnel timeout. Fail-safe mode had activated. The system was responding as designed, locking non-verified access pathways and freezing command updates across 3 major ops hubs. At 0647, the second email came in. Then 10 more, all tagged urgent. Requests for clarity, reports of terminal rejections, restricted login chains. By 0715, the inbox was red, auto-flagged. My phone buzzed for the first time at 0722. The name on the screen read Jackson's office. I let it ring. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't even smiling. I was just watching the plan unfold exactly as it was supposed to. Not out of revenge, but to protect a system from the kind of decisions that forgot why it was built in the first place. The silence was gone now. In its place came the echo of people realizing they'd misunderstood the weight of what they were handling. The sirens would come later. For now, it was just tension. Tightly wound, steady, controlled, like a perimeter waiting to be breached but sealed from within. I poured a second cup of coffee and waited. By mid-morning, the network's pulse was erratic. SentinelNet had entered its second stage protocol, which meant automated encryption of all Tier 1 operational data. Mission logs, surveillance flags, active threat profiles, every byte sealed behind a rotating key with no central override. The intelligence division was the first to panic. Their dashboards went dark, and terminal queries returned nothing but checksum errors. Requests for airstrike authorizations, joint command updates, and field unit syncs began to stack without acknowledgement. By noon, the firewall rules collapsed, not exploded, just stopped processing updates. Without the root certificate, the rule set could no longer differentiate between internal trust and external risk. The outer perimeter had gone passive, a blind spot stretching across global operations. No one could verify if data was being siphoned or if probes were just echoing. But the possibility alone sent command units into full incident mode. They couldn't see threats, couldn't react. All they had was static. At the Pentagon, JAG officers scrambled to interpret the lockout clause. But it wasn't a breach. It wasn't malware. It was protocol. And that made it worse. They'd triggered the collapse themselves by removing the only person who could stop it. Field units reported delays in intelligence delivery. Surveillance drones began logging blind returns because their coordinates couldn't be verified against encrypted maps. Tactical movements were frozen for fear of walking into compromised zones. It wasn't chaos like fire and smoke. It was the silence of control disappearing, like a plane flying blind over open water with no ground signal and no radar. Every desk with a red phone was ringing. Every high-clearance channel echoed with the same phrase, "We can't see." No one admitted out loud that the system wasn't broken. It was just following rules no one had read, protocols they had signed but never understood. The kind built not just for function but for trust. And now that trust was gone. For the first time in decades, America's cyber perimeter wasn't breached from the outside. It unraveled from within. Not because of a hostile actor, but because they removed the only person who knew how to keep the lights on. The call came just after 1800. I was in my garage, organizing cables I didn't need anymore, when my secure line lit up with a number I recognized from the Pentagon's contingency pool. I let it ring twice before answering, not because I was trying to make a point, but because I could. The voice on the other end was clipped and urgent. They wanted me back. Not to talk, not to consult, to fix what had gone dark. I listened without reacting, then told them I'd consider it under certain terms. I arrived at the briefing center the next morning in civilian clothes and no rush in my step. They had cleared the room for legal, command, and a few faces I recognized from high-clearance corridors. No small talk. I laid it out, full technical authority over SentinelNet for 12 months, triple my former salary, and written, public acknowledgement of my role, accompanied by a formal apology from command. They shifted in their seats. Legal started to talk percentages and adjusted rates. One of the generals leaned forward like posture might substitute for leverage. But no one said no. They couldn't afford to. The system was locked, the intel was blind, and the clock was running out. There was a pause when I finished. Not of disagreement, but of discomfort. They knew they had to agree. The room wasn't about negotiation anymore. It was about rescue. And I was the only one holding the map. They accepted the terms. Not enthusiastically, but definitively. I signed nothing until I saw the language myself, line by line. When the acknowledgement was finalized, I requested it be read aloud at the next ops briefing. It wasn't about applause, it was about correction. When I stepped into the command center later that afternoon, the room didn't erupt. There were no cheers, just a wall of quiet, focused eyes that tracked my every step to the console. I felt the weight shift. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was the stillness that comes with respect. Jackson wasn't there. Word was, he'd been reassigned pending internal review. I didn't ask where. Didn't need to. As I typed in the reactivation sequence, hands moved to take notes, screens began to light back up, and the room remembered how to breathe. No one said thank you. They didn't have to. I was back on my terms. Not for revenge, for clarity, for control. For the systems that had never failed me until people decided they understood them better than I did. And for once, they didn't interrupt. They just watched as the perimeter came back online. The hallway outside the operations wing was quiet, too quiet for a base that had just come back from the edge. I turned the corner and found him standing there, posture stiff, eyes a little dimmer than before. Colonel Jackson didn't say much. He just extended his hand. I looked at it for a second, not out of hesitation, but to give the silence a moment to settle in. Then I met his eyes, calm and direct, and gave him what he wasn't expecting. Just like you said, sir, I'm just a tech guy. The one who made sure everyone understood what they were running. Next time, read the procedures, not just the titles. His hand stayed in the air a second too long before falling back to his side. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned and walked toward the exit, boots steady against the polished floor. Outside, the wind caught my collar as I passed the flagpole. The stars and stripes rippled above me, crisp against the afternoon sky. I didn't look back. Not at the colonel. Not at the building. Not at anything I just walked away from. Some things don't need a second glance.